BLM.
White supremacy. Why isn't that in your definition?
We got a little bit of ranting from this
Apparently.
week and the performance activism that we saw. Oh, please tell me I put it on the right page. Let's see. Building bridges. It's long-winded Friday. Friday. It's long-winded Friday. Okay, it looks like we're good, right?
It seems that way.
Okay.
Do you want me to go on my computer look?
I'll pull it up on my phone.
Okay. Hi, y'all. We're doing double
whammy. Wait, let's see. Oh. See, can people hear us? Hello. I'm sorry. We're on IG and Facebook, and I'm just trying to navigate.
Because we can now, because we're in the same spot. And like, who is it? Feel Good. He's like, if you don't like that view, then come over here to this other view. But some folks, it's easier to be on one than the other.
Okay, I could see us. I'm just checking the sound. Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Okay, y'all.
Because we can now.
What's up? Let's check in. How are you today?
I gotta see. You can see my low rock residue.
You could see my red cup. How are you today, Maren? I feel like this is like we should rename this Coffee with Jenny and Maren.
Caffy tack.
If you want to grab a coffee or tea.
Caffy tack on a Friday. How am I doing? I'm here. I'm present. I'm good. You know, just I don't know. I'm good. What's
Good.
more than
Yeah,
good?
yeah,
I know.
yeah. I'm gonna challenge you again.
Yeah. I feel connected. I feel grounded. I feel ready.
Great.
How about you?
Great. I'm also in the good, happy category. I'm feeling connected as well, part of a great team. I'm feeling like this has been a week and we just keep delivering these awesome trainings and connecting with community members. And sometimes I'm like, what is happening? Like, this is all working. We just had a groundwork yesterday and I'm feeling proud and present as well. So we want to talk about the two topics. They kind of connect, kind of don't. One of them is performance activism and what that looks like for people with privileged identities, specifically in the arena of dismantling white supremacy. We've seen this a lot from white folks, from allies, from anti-racists, this need to, what it feels like is perform and just really demonstrate what an activist they are. And the other topic that's been on our minds is professionalism and personal connection. And when do those blend? And how do you do this DEI work talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion while being part of a professional organization? And also it gets really personal. So how do you navigate that? So where do you want to start?
Let's talk about the whites.
Maren, like recently has been loving that
I don't
phrase.
know why. I
The
know.
whites, the whites.
Well, I think it's more when Hamida says it. I don't know. It just, it hits. It's funny to me. I love that I can be at a point of that's funny to me because I know it would still like really eke a lot of people.
How do you think you got to that point of being able to laugh at the term the whites? Because that's an inside term. People of color say it all the time, but you really got to be cool with white people to say it in that multiracial group.
It's been a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of listening, a lot of getting to a point of groundedness, rootedness, like a very broad understanding that when that term is used, I feel like I've done enough work, and I'm not racked in guilt anymore, like guilt or shame of like, and so I feel like I'm more and more solidly understanding what my role is and feeling good about that role, and therefore also feeling like I have a sense of what I am doing, which I think a lot of white folks are still really wrestling with, or in the mess of I feel so guilty, I feel so shameful, I need to go do something. And like terms of like that could still maybe like, but it's not me, or don't put me in that category, I'm trying to do something different. Yeah. And that's where like some of the fragility and kind of performativeness that we are seeing too, that folks are like, you can kind of see where folks are at depending on things they say or do in regards to that. And it really, to me, it ties into work around processing guilt, shame, understanding oneself and role.
Yeah. I think on the opposite end in my journey, I don't know if it's the opposite end, but I think that, for racial identity development, most often it happens in stages. And there's a model that we use that talks about 6 stages, moving one from like, I don't see race, I'm colorblind, to 6, like I'm an advocate now, I'm an ally, I'm for this thing. And I really have been feeling lately like I'm moving more back into that multiracial space of having gone through the us and them mentality, which just still pops up. It's not linear, right? But having worked a lot on the I'm different from white folks, and y'all are the enemy and you're the oppressor and all these things, and being able to hold that truth with the truth of, and man, I mess up a lot with a lot of these other identities that I hold. Mm-hmm. And man, I have a lot of areas to grow as a non-Black person. Mm-hmm. And man, I'm a cisgendered woman, and that holds so many privileges in the US and all these other things. So that on the flip side of you being like, haha, whites, I feel like I'm like, I don't even want to try to make a parallel in terms of wording, but I feel more secure in dealing with people's white fragility and watching their white performance activism. Like, I see you, I know what this is about. I've seen it many times. You can't trigger me like you used to be able to. And that feels really good because it feels like I could enter more spaces without being completely like on edge. But performance activism, we've seen this again and again in the past year, 2020, a lot that came up. And the ways I saw it coming up were a lot of white folks, it's like they want to be the first one to name the social justice event that's taking place, or like the protest, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think, and that's what I simultaneously at the same time, I can laugh and also like, here's a predictable pattern, and as a white person too, like I see what you're doing, and it's coming from a place of, I see where you're at in your journey. And so there's an element of they're trying out this language that they've learned and attempting to integrate it. It's just they're integrating it in a way that's probably not the best place.
So this is what I had a thought earlier. It's like so many people we know and we work with, I know that I wouldn't say this. There's a lot of people beyond the stage of that second or third racial identity development stage. For white folks, what you often hear is references to people in their life who are people of color. Whether it's literally they'll say, I had a Black friend growing up, or I grew up in a Latinx community in California. We only spoke Spanish. I am a child of missionaries. That was a big thing when I went to Wheaton College. So I feel like I'm more Colombian than anything. Or I have adopted a child of color, and let me talk about them nonstop, or my spouse or partner is person of color. And whenever I hear that, I see performance activism loud and clear. And I think a lot of people of color can pick up on that shit right away of like, oh, they're trying to prove themselves, right? So then there's the next level of that where it's like, not, you know, enough to not do that, but you're still going to sneak in something around, well, and the big words around it too, like how the insurgents of the Capitol and the white terrorism, like I can hear white folks trying to get every word right and trying to be the first one to name that they not only are aware of what's going on, but they're on the right side as allies and social justice warriors. And I could see how that could, it's like a backlash from how much, like when the Black Lives Matter movement had this resurgence, there was so much of a call to white people, like name where you're at, right? And that's great. But there also is such a thing as going overboard. So we're trying to help white folks like find that middle ground. It's more centered with who they are.
Yeah, and I think we've realized that like there are different spaces where that is coming out. And yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of white splaining. And I think, again, it's a part of like, I am practicing saying these things that I haven't been to fully articulate before. And yes, because I do it too, like everything that I say about white supremacy and whiteness, I have learned from folks of color and from trainings I've been in. And so it's like a practice of, okay, I'm hearing this, I'm understanding this, I know I need to know this, and I need to try it out in order to like understand how I can authentically eventually own it and say it too. And yes, what you just said too is like what I feel really called to, and what I continue to help with white women specifically, or white folks in coaching, is this mm-hmm. tension, is that they're not seeing themselves really in this sense of urgency and discomfort, and I'm supposed to do something and get out of this discomfort, so get me out of it now, tell me the answers, when take a deep breath. And then what we're seeing too, like all of a sudden everybody in this one group it's just like, but white supremacy. And we're like, we've sometimes in certain scenarios, like, but we shouldn't say white supremacy.
I know, my God. You know how much we've had to filter our language, edit it, figure out the right way to reach this topic, to truly talk about dismantling white supremacy. Like 3 years ago, I remember having a conversation with some people on our team, and there was some pushback and some fear around let's call it white dominant culture. I don't know if we should do a training like that. There's other people doing trainings around white supremacy, and they're the experts. And I was like, first of all, the audacity for you to say that these white groups who are leading these trainings are the experts. Like, people of color, I had never seen that white supremacy packet by Tim O'Kuhn and Kenneth Jones until 3 years ago. But as soon as I saw it, it was like pretty immediately integrated. And it was just like, yes, this is how it is. Thank you for someone to spell it out. And that's how it often is for people of color. So it frustrates me when I see white folks, like I can hold the frustration, but I do still get these pings of frustration of like, man, okay, so now it's cool for you to talk about white supremacy and so you just have all the privilege to just show up to a space of strangers and name this, and you don't even have to blink an eye.
You're not concerned.
You don't have
at
to
all.
worry about your safety. You don't have to worry
Mhm.
about how you're going to be perceived.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about whether people are going to put you in the bad camp, the angry camp.
Yeah.
Even if you're angry in the training and like taking over the space. So I know I named earlier that I feel like I'm maturing in my journey, and there is maturity, and there's also, I think there's always going to be an element of like frustration when I see white folks being able to move into spaces of leadership, power, influence around anti-racism way quicker than I ever could.
Yeah, and I think that I feel cautious about that too, of like, and the piece of, so cool, you can intellectualize this, cool, you have language around it, but how have you embodied it? How have you processed emotions? How have you built community? How have you really leaned into humility and curiosity, and are actually like changing how you show up? And I think that's the piece of like that, those two things happening at the same time, of like, but what about white supremacy and taking up all this space, and like just unabashedly like not concerned. And I think the question for white folks always is like, why are you doing this? Why am I saying this?
That's a good one to ask.
What is the actual purpose behind me saying anything? There's a meme, I gotta find it too, that I feel like I used in middle school too, that was used around just like even posting stuff on social media of like a pause, like, is it kind? Is it necessary? Anybody know what I mean? I gotta look that up.
I know
right?
which one, like, is it helpful to the community or something?
Yeah.
Isn't it like think?
Yes,
acronym?
maybe that's what
Yeah.
it is. So like, white folks, you need to do that.
Yeah, how about you try thinking before speaking?
Just, is it, do I need to take up this space, or is this that? And if I really do, because again, I don't want to, because there's this other tension around damned if I do, damned if I don't, but I'm told I'm supposed to say something, but then if I don't, then I'm silent, and like all these different feelings around what to do or don't do. And
it's supposed to be hard.
It's that's it, of like, and it's supposed to be hard. It's going to be uncomfortable because you've never, as a white, like, I would imagine that it's very rare that you have been in this much discomfort, the right to comfort, and the default of places that you've felt that you can own and be in, and just ultimately step in and be seen as a leader is something to continuously question and look at.
I mean, at the end of the day, like at Building Bridges, I want us to keep doing more community trainings. I want us to keep interacting with more community members that have never met each other, but get together for a 2-hour session and really hash it out. What does diversity, equity, and inclusion look like in our world? But it takes time, y'all. Like if we spend the first 10 minutes of a 2-hour session having to navigate people's performance activism, like that takes away space from the conversation. And so I just want to push whoever's listening to like really truly be aware of how you're taking space, because it pains me to know that there are people in a lot of the sessions we do with more oppressed identities, not just race and ethnicity, many other identities that have special perspective to bring to the conversation, and they don't get a chance. And so the group leaves hearing mainly the same shit that they've heard all week, which is, oh, what do we do to dismantle white supremacy? Oh, BLM. Oh, this, oh, that. Like, how is
just
that?
do something.
How is that helping anybody? Like, one of the groups we worked with, like complete strangers together, but I kept pushing everyone because I was just kind of over it. And I was like, okay, cool. So what does practical change look like? So what can you actually do? Because oftentimes this performance includes like just blaming the powers that be and the outside world at what everyone else is doing wrong, when how the hell are we supposed to change anything if each one of us doesn't own up to how we've contributed? And that's such a building bridges way, right? It's such a learned way. That's what I want to share with people, that you can look internally, and that can greatly inform helpful external change.
Yeah, so there's an element of like more as I go along in this, like there are very predictable patterns that exist, especially when it comes to white folks and the way that they use or take space. And so like going back to like, and the, you know, so there's an element of I can be in neutrality or amusement around that, and that helps me also to kind of stay in it of like, yep, and this is the constant work that I have to keep showing up and meeting people where they're at, and knowing that that's why we've decided to do affinity spaces, right? To build up the fact that there's so much front end that still needs to happen in order to even have a multiracial space that could really be deep in a way that we want to facilitate and help.
Yeah, because it's like a lot of that verbal processing has to just happen in white affinity groups or white one-on-one coaching, because it's okay for you to want to like put words to everything that you're learning around dismantling white supremacy and all that. But a lot of that is just 101 to people of color. So it takes time away from the conversation to move it forward. So it's not that you shouldn't be processing these things at all as white folks. It's just process them with other white folks. And can you be aware? Can you call each other out when you get into the dynamic of performance activism, even with one another, of this little competition of like, who knows more, or who can name more of their oppressed identities, or who can name more resources or books or podcasts, or who has more family members of color, all of that stuff. I'm sure it's popping up in the affinity spaces as well. And it's just, it's unnecessary. We don't need to do that.
Yeah, and I know this brings me back to even what you and I were talking about as facilitators, and what we hope for our facilitator team, and just what is really a huge element of being in a group and being in a space with each other is that you are, and as white folks, I like to pass off too, of just like reading the race of the space. Like when I am in a new group, am I taking stock of who's in the space? And also not assuming who's in the space of like, oh, I think that this person's this certain gender, or I think this person's this certain race. And also you could at least be mindful of that, of gender, of race. And if it is a predominantly white space, or there's white males in it, then again, how are we already looking in that group of like, okay, and I don't need to say a thing in this group. Or if I do, I'm going to be really intentional of when and how and why. And I won't die. I won't die if I don't have something to say, or I haven't said something to the group. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're still not a leader or a knower or a thinker or a believer. But how do you take up a little bit less?
Yeah, because everybody wants to talk about equity now, racial equity. What does that look like? Dismantling white supremacy. What does that look like? And I feel like people aren't grasping that it's going to take a complete tipping of the scales, y'all, for us to get back to a truly equal place. And that means an analogy I've used before. If for centuries there's only been a long table of 12 white men representing everyone, cis-het white men, then that means not only do you have to give people space at the table now and take away, let's start with 6 of those chairs and give them to people with oppressed identities, but then you got to give them the mic for 10 years because they haven't said anything. And so how does that look like in your organizations? How does that look like in your community? How does that look like in your family? How does that look like in all of these spaces where not only I see white folks becoming more aware of, oh shit, I've been taught to take up a lot of space and to assert myself and to speak freely and all these things. Like, well, then you're probably going to have to shut up for a year of your life. Like try that out, like in terms of learning from other folks, not in terms of losing your voice. Cause I've heard that as well. I've seen it go sideways where some white people are like, well, now I feel like my voice is just taken away from me and I can't do anything. Like don't let yourself fall into helplessness and victimness and victimhood around this, because not saying anything is doing a shit ton. I can't emphasize enough how much not taking up space and allowing others to move up to the plate is doing a lot.
There's so many trapdoors. There's so many trapdoors to opt out and to, create a story around, well, I've tried this or I've done this, and then I got this experience or I got this response, and therefore that's my excuse to not try something else, or to not integrate what I've learned, or maybe seen a mistake that and a different way to go about it the next time around something similar happens.
Yeah.
And I think to segue into kind of the second part of this, like the convolutedness or the necessity, and I think what I'm hearing at a call, especially for white folks, is this: what is it to truly be in community and in relationship and building new culture together, so that we are going against white supremacist ways, so we can show up differently, and how important we're trying to normalize and give permission to our clients that, again, emotions and cultural intelligence and just being together, like being together and normalizing relationship above all. Like, say what you said about building bridges.
Boy.
Like we wouldn't really be where we're at if.
Yeah, I'll get to that, but I have one other thought about this, and that is that with performance activism, like we're talking about systemic racism and white supremacy, and so in that case, it really does apply to white folks most, because you have the privileged identity, but that's not the only way that it shows up. And as a person of color, I've seen performance activism show up in myself around areas that I'm not as educated in at all. So I feel like I have that's good for me as a person of color. If you're watching this as a person of color, like how do you tap into those other identities? For me, it's being cisgender, it's being heterosexual, it's being able-bodied, where it's like I really can check myself and realize when I'm trying to say something that makes me seem like I know more about the topic than I actually do. Mm-hmm. The other thing with that too is if you're a white person in relationship and co-workership with people of color, I don't know how to say this, but it makes me think of the conversation we had of intersectionality today with folks. I really loved that there was space for BIPOC to talk about other identities that they have and to talk about their privilege. Like that is so important. If you're not making space for people of color to be able to show up in multiple identities and you're pigeonholing them into, in this space, in this place, you can only be the BIPOC. Like that is unfair and unjust. And we need to learn about all of our identities just as much as white folks. So I'm just feeling like there have been moments in my life where white people, white leaders, they want to like put me on a pedestal or be like, you're the one who should be the voice and person leading this thing. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I have a lot of privilege. You're trying to take the easy route. I'm the closest person to you, so you can reach to me and try to elevate me. When there's people who have way more oppressed identities that should be leading and in my place. So like, I don't even know why this rant came about, but I want to name that there is always more work to be done. And even if you're in relationship with another person of color, Have you ever talked about how many privileged identities y'all have amongst each other? Because it could be that together as a duo, as a friendship, there's a shit ton of privilege in that anyway, already. So how are you truly diverse in your community and the way you're doing life? I'll stop. I started like ranting.
Go, Jenny, go.
But moving into the other thing that was in this title is we've been wrestling with the tension of professionalism and being personal with one another. And we see that again and again in our DEI trainings, because a lot of times they are in quote unquote professional settings, and we ask pretty personal questions. So how have you navigated that first in your own life, Maureen?
Well, this was a big aha. And the phrase personal before professional that's something that has stuck in my ear from a NEA training that I went into, national, I'm gonna have to look up what that is, but it's a national organization that does training for schools. And so for me, I think that is partly this understanding that I can I can be honest and in reflection around the identities that I hold, and I can be in my fullest humanity around this, that to me is what I felt like I was missing or desired, especially as a teacher. Like there was an element of I'm supposed to do this and I'm supposed to teach kids and I show up every day, but the more I learned of and I also thought that I believed in relationships and that was what I was doing as a teacher. And also I was completely off the mark on that when it comes to race and understanding how that dynamic played out. So for me, it was just, it's been a release and a really important to that being the case, that I can be honest, I can be messy, and who I am and how I see the world and how I interact with the world and how I process the world is as important to you as it is to me.
Yeah, it's interesting too when interacting with white folks around this tension of professionalism versus being personal, because I think for myself, as well as a lot of BIPOC that I've seen, and I use BIPOC and people of color interchangeably, just to name. I feel like they both can be helpful at times and interchangeable. So if you're wondering about that. What I have seen many BIPOC experience with myself is just it's completely natural for them to be blended. How does it not? Because if your lived experience is to be othered and to be viewed as a person of color and to be microaggressed and to be all these things, then when you talk about it, you're going to have to get personal. And even in the BIPOC groundwork we had yesterday, it's always hard to really fill out the 4 I's and talk about these microaggressions. Many times they happen in the professional world. So how are we going to separate them? Because our lived experience is happening in both worlds simultaneously. Yeah. So when white folks, even when we breach the conversation of this is professional, and it's not just white folks, people of color can do this too, where it's is this professional or is this personal? It's well, even that in itself is a privilege to be able to choose when you opt in or out. And so if DEI is only part of your work life,
that's a problem.
That's a problem.
Yep. And for me, it highlights professionalism and what I have had to unlearn around what even again what I thought relationships were when it came to teaching or being in a professional space. I was such a little robot. I'm supposed to do this and I'm supposed to show up and I'm going to show up to my classroom. I don't know, just like seeing this little robot teacher. And it's so sad to me. Like white supremacy is in my head and I'm just going to do that.
Yeah. There's so much conditioning.
Yeah.
I feel like building bridges really open the horizons in terms of facilitation, because I think I've always been a facilitator. I've always liked questions. But it hasn't been as perfected is too strong a word, but honed in on until I entered the Building Bridges community, because I think sometimes, like in the teaching, I remember feeling like a little robot too, of like, I was supposed to ask these questions and blah, 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 blah. And I felt like when I veered off and I went into my intuition, I was doing it wrong. And like the teacher supervisors who would observe me, I'm like, oh shit, they're going to see I didn't ask question 2, 3A, 3A, 3B, 3C on my lesson plan. And I went a different direction, but it usually worked. Mm-hmm. And then there was times when I veered off, and I would be in personal settings and I would just go boom, 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 boom. Like, I was known for being the gold digger of question asking, not in a good way. People didn't want to hang out with me, because once I asked one question, I would ask another and another follow-up, to the point where most times people would be crying. Who wants to hang out with that girl? Like, why was I so serious? I was always trying to develop people. And they'd be like, can we just talk about like funny stuff? And I'd be like, but what about your parents made you feel that way? It was intense.
Wow.
I know. So I pulled way back. And then to the point where I was like, we're going to talk about the shallow ass shit, because that's all people want to talk about. And now it's like I'm trying to find the medium of poke, okay, let it go. But when people are like, how do you know when to ask follow-up questions? I'm like, it's because I used to do it way overboard, and I'm trying to find the middle ground.
That's hilarious. And also not a surprise. I love that. So it sounds like you dug deep. But I think there's an element too of like people I've seen where people just like any sort of like a question or a follow-up question just like derails people. Like, well, why are you psychologizing me? Why are you therapizing me? Like, what is there a right? I'm like worried about
like in training or in life?
No, just in life.
Oh yeah, that too.
Like just in general, like trying so tell me more about that. And like, I don't know, my family and friend, like certain friends early on where I'm like learning these new things, and then just trying to ask some questions. Folks get real uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's where I feel like I've tried to just really lean into cultural intelligence, because you got to be a cultural chameleon out here in these streets with the kind of personalities we have. You can't just go out and about and be like, tell me more about that. People are going to be like, I don't know you. So I always try to trick people into it, if we're being honest.
I love it.
I would be like, oh, that's interesting. Have you ever thought about like, what if this is how we've been conditioned, like I'll try to get creative with how I ask the question. Cause I learned from the past, feels like a past life I lived, of just being too direct, too fast sometimes. It's like a healthy balance. But I
feel like go ahead, finish.
I don't know what I was going to say.
Just brings me back to and dating.
I know. Talk about blending professional and personal, right? Like, oh God.
It's hard to stop. And then like people are like, wow, it's so great to talk to you. And you're such a great listener. It's like, yeah, because I asked follow-up questions and then you never asked me a thing. Like, you think this is a conversation.
Yeah.
That's a whole other. Anyway, professional, personal.
Oh, and then back to that point that, so we've been talking with a lot of our clients in our community trainings, like Maureen always says it's personal before it's professional. And I always say it in a different way, especially in BIPOC spaces. Like, you could show up fully here. If you got kids, that's okay. They could be in the screen. If you want to cry cry. If you want to laugh, laugh. Like all emotions are welcome here. And I think that that's always such a cool norm that we carry in posture, because people are always surprised.
Yep.
And they're always, a lot of times people are always apologizing, especially women, for their emotions. And that makes me sad.
Super sad.
Because it's like, wow, you really have been trained in thinking that you can't be your full, like, that's human. It's human to feel. And so some of the times I feel like we just ask fairly simple questions that break people down in a way where they're like, I didn't expect to cry, or I'm emotional. And I think it's not so much the question versus the space that's been created where it's like, yes, we have an agenda, but let's see what you want to talk about. And I'm genuinely curious about who you are, your experience, and how you've been affected by systemic oppression, because it's fucked us all up and we're recovering and trying to make change at the same time. So obviously there's going to be emotions.
Okay, last minute. Oh, say what you said. Go back to the building bridges, though, of like, we wouldn't be where we are. I think I don't know. I feel like it's an important
Yeah, when it comes to that professional personal balance, and I was talking about with Maren, just like, I recognize the role that personal connection plays in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Without it, what I've seen among our team on building bridges through the years, our team has changed, gotten bigger and smaller and bigger with different things, is that our personal connection, specifically our ability to empathize with one another and trust one another, has gotten us through some really hard conversations. And when I see people starting to move into DEI, and I can see the horizon of, okay, if y'all really lean into this, eventually you're going to have to talk salaries. Eventually you're going to talk who gets what role, whose responsibilities. Eventually you're going to have honest conversations if you feel like your teammates are slacking off and you're doing more. A bunch of stuff that Maren and I have had to talk about. And we wouldn't have been able to talk about it had we not had a personal connection. And so I feel like a lot of people meet us and they're like, wow, I can't believe you're able to navigate being roommates and friends and coworkers. And yes, it's hard.
It's hard.
It's so hard. And also it's making us I believe it's making us such a stronger team.
Yeah, 100%.
As business partners, as professional partners. So I think that do not discount the role that personal connection and trust plays in DEI.
Do not discount. And do not discount, the messiness that it is to be human and to like move through some stuckness with each other. All right, we've got to cut this off because we have other places to go. Check out
Feeling words.
Feeling words. Go back to those feeling words.
I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling heard. I'm feeling empowered.
Yeah, now I feel like I have a renewed excitement. I might be a little jacked up on some caffeine. And yeah, calm and grateful.
Cool. See you next time, y'all. Thanks for tuning in.
These are so